There are days when the most powerful decisions are made not in boardrooms, but in silence. When power doesn't arrive with an entourage, but walks quietly through a glass door wearing sneakers and a neutral smile. At precisely 9:15 a.m., the main entrance of Summit First Financial's flagship branch slid open with a gentle whoosh. In stepped a woman in a navy blue hoodie, dark tailored pants, and clean but modest shoes. Her natural hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she wore no jewelry save for a discreet silver watch that gleamed faintly in the morning light. She moved with the grace of someone used to commanding rooms, though she made no effort to draw attention. Her posture was upright, her expression serene, her eyes observant. She carried a well-worn leather handbag tucked beneath one arm, the kind gifted not for brand but for meaning. A soft click echoed beneath her feet with each step across the polished marble floor. To anyone watching, she might have seemed like a middle-class professional, a woman stopping by to handle her finances before heading to work or brunch. But this was Celeste Morgan, the newly appointed CEO of Summit First Financial, the first black woman to ever hold the role in the bank's 150-year history. No one in the branch recognized her, and that was exactly the point. Celeste had made the decision weeks earlier after reviewing months of data that refused to stay silent. Despite strong overall customer satisfaction ratings, she noticed a troubling trend: disproportionate drop-offs in account retention among customers of color. Hidden within quarterly performance reports and net promoter scores were stories that numbers couldn't tell, stories of exclusion, microaggressions, and silenced dignity. She didn't want filtered updates. She didn't want staged branch visits or rehearsed greetings. What she needed was the truth, unvarnished and raw. So she walked into her bank as a stranger. The flagship branch, the pride of Summit's public image, buzzed with subdued activity. Employees in sleek uniforms moved briskly between counters, their expressions professional, their tones measured. On the walls, banners displayed the bank's mission statement in elegant serif font: financial excellence, community trust, and equitable service. For every customer, every time. Celeste took a seat in the waiting area, appearing to check her phone. In reality, she was watching. A tall white man in a tailored suit entered moments after her. Before he could even approach the front desk, a young employee intercepted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome back. We have a desk ready for you." No number, no wait, no hesitation. 10 minutes later, an elderly Asian couple stepped through the door. The teller who greeted them didn't smile. She simply pointed to the kiosk and said, "Take a number, please." Her voice was flat, dismissive. The couple exchanged a glance but complied without a word. Celeste observed with increasing clarity. A white woman in yoga pants approached the express service counter, casual and friendly. AN was greeted with an effortless, "How was your weekend?" The transaction was wrapped up in under 2 minutes. Then came a Hispanic man in a janitorial uniform. The same teller from earlier stiffened. Her voice dropped an octave. "Do you have two forms of ID?" she asked, even though the transaction was identical. A simple cash withdrawal. It took over 10 minutes and several verification steps. In just 15 minutes, Celeste saw enough to confirm what the reports could not. It wasn't about rules. It was about who the rules were applied to. She exhaled quietly and stood, walking toward the main teller window. The line was modest. 3 customers had come in after her, all of them white. All of them served before her. When Celeste finally reached the window, she was greeted by Megan Reed, a young teller with blonde curls and carefully manicured nails. Megan had just finished a bubbly conversation with a college-age customer about vacation plans in Greece. As Celeste approached, Megan's smile waned. Her tone shifted. "How can I help you?" she asked, the friendliness stripped from her voice. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please," Celeste said calmly, sliding her ID and a completed slip across the counter. Megan glanced at the slip. Her brows rose slightly. "$120,000. Celeste nodded once. "Yes, it's within the transaction limits for my business account." Megan looked down at the ID, then back up at Celeste, then back again. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Her eyes flicked toward the senior teller at the next window, a man named Kyle Thompson, whose posture straightened as he caught her glance. I'll need to get someone to verify this, Megan murmured, already flagging Kyle over. The tone, the scrutiny, the unspoken presumption. It was happening again. Celeste said nothing. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply folded her hands and waited, with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly where she stood and what was about to happen. Because this moment wasn't just a test for her staff, it was the beginning of an unraveling, of a reckoning, of justice served in broad daylight, under the watchful gaze of the very institution that had once vowed to treat every client with dignity. The hum of the lobby air conditioning and the quiet clicking of keyboards formed a kind of backdrop noise, soft enough to be ignored, loud enough to emphasize the silence that now surrounded Celeste Morgan. Across from her, Megan Reed had gone quiet, her fingers frozen just above her keyboard. She didn't look up as Kyle Thompson, the senior teller, made his way over, adjusting the sleeves of his crisp button-down shirt as if he were preparing for a confrontation. Kyle's presence changed the temperature of the interaction. Where Megan had hesitated, Kyle brought something different, an ease that came not from professionalism, but from practiced superiority. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice just loud enough to carry across the tiled lobby. "We're just verifying something," Megan replied quickly, not meeting Celeste's gaze. Kyle picked up Celeste's ID from the counter and held it up to the light with exaggerated scrutiny, as if expecting it to fade into counterfeit in his hands. "This is quite a bit of money," he said, squinting at her photograph and then at her face. "What's the purpose of the withdrawal, if you don't mind me asking?" Celeste didn't blink. "I do mind," she said evenly. "But since you've asked, it's for a scheduled business investment. I've provided all required documents." The silence after her answer was telling. Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, he passed the ID back to Megan without a word, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer to whisper something behind the counter. Whatever he said made Megan shift in her seat. She nodded, then typed something slowly, hesitantly. Celeste could see the conflict in her movements, the kind of internal tug-of-war that comes when someone knows they're part of something wrong, but doesn't quite know how to stop it. Just then, a third employee arrived. This one wore a smug smile that needed no introduction. His name tag read Richard Kane, but his expression read something far less polite. He didn't approach the counter directly. Instead, he leaned on the side partition, arms folded, as if watching a spectacle unfold. "So, what are we thinking here?" he said to Kyle, nodding toward Celeste as if she weren't there. "One of those check-cashing scams, maybe? Settlement money?" The words hit the air like a slap. Celeste, still calm, raised a brow, not in outrage but in acknowledgement. So this was where we were going. Richard's comment wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an awkward choice of words. It was intentional, a probe, a push, an effort to see how far they could go before she broke. But she didn't break. "I'm sorry," Celeste said, her tone even and professional, "but I'd like to speak with someone who can complete this transaction without speculation about my financial history." Richard chuckled, not out of humor but out of discomfort, masked as arrogance. "You'll want to speak with our manager then," he said, standing up straight. "Rachel's on her way." The name landed like a signal. Rachel Whitman, the branch manager, was known within internal reports as a results-driven leader. Her branch had consistently outperformed others in new account openings, loan originations, and upsell conversions. On paper, she was a star, but data doesn't measure demeanor. What Celeste had seen in exit interviews and flagged emails and barely submitted complaints told a different story, a pattern of selective service, unspoken, unofficial, but undeniably present. And now Celeste was about to meet it face to face. Rachel arrived like she owned the building, a tall woman in sharp heels, a tailored navy pantsuit, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She walked with the assurance of someone whose decisions were rarely questioned, whose power had never been challenged. "Ma'am," Rachel said coolly, not offering her name, not asking for Celeste's. "I understand there's a concern about your transaction." Celeste turned toward her with the patience of someone who had lived this scene before. Perhaps not in this exact lobby, with these exact players, but in boardrooms, airports, restaurants. She had felt the tone shift. She knew the game. "There's no concern," she replied. "I'm simply withdrawing funds from my account." Rachel folded her arms. 120,000 is a significant amount of cash. You'll understand we have procedures. Celeste nodded once. And I've followed them. I've provided ID, account number, withdrawal form, and my bank card. I'd now like my money. Rachel didn't move. Her eyes scanned Celeste from head to toe. The modest attire, the natural hair, the absence of a designer handbag. A slow smirk formed. "You'll have to understand," she said softly, stepping closer. "We have a certain standard of clientele here. Large transactions from unknown individuals raise red flags." There it was. Not even thinly veiled. Not even coded. Celeste could hear a slight gasp from someone standing in line behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The temperature in the room had changed again. Rachel reached across the counter, picked up Celeste's withdrawal slip, and, with a sharp snap, slid it back toward her. "This request is denied," she said simply. "You're welcome to try one of the smaller branches, or a check cashing center. They may be more accustomed to your type of business." Celeste didn't respond immediately. She looked down at the paper now resting in front of her. She didn't pick it up. She didn't leave. She reached calmly into her bag and retrieved her phone. With one hand, she held it at waist height and began recording. Quietly, discreetly. Then she took a step back, turned to the security camera mounted on the wall above, and gave it the slightest, most knowing glance. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And Rachel Whitman was standing directly in its eye. For a long second, no one moved. The slip of paper that had been so dismissively shoved back toward her sat untouched on the counter. Celeste didn't reach for it. She didn't argue. She simply stood, phone in hand, still and silent. The calm at the center of a storm only she could see forming. Behind the counter, Rachel Whitman stared back at her, arms crossed, her expression etched in the cold confidence of someone certain she had won. A few feet away, Richard Kane shifted his weight smugly and muttered under his breath, "She's stalling." He didn't care if anyone heard, least of all the woman whose worth he had just belittled. But Celeste Morgan wasn't stalling. She was watching how Megan Reed pretended to shuffle papers she didn't need to touch. Watching how Kyle Thompson subtly leaned on the counter's edge, physically asserting his authority like it was furniture. Watching how the elderly black man seated near the lobby door now sat forward in his chair, hands on knees, eyes lowered, as if trying not to relive something that felt painfully familiar. Then she moved, not toward the exit, not toward security, but toward the truth. She stepped slightly to the side of the teller window, still visible to the entire branch, and raised her phone to her ear. The lobby was still filled with background noise, keyboards, hushed conversations, the faint rhythmic hum of machines counting cash. But that sound was beginning to dim under the weight of what was happening. Celeste's voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, too calm. "Veronica," she said, "it's me." On the other end of the line, Veronica Hayes, Chief Operations Officer of Summit First Financial and longtime confidant to Celeste, stood from her desk so fast her coffee spilled. She didn't need context. The sound of Celeste's voice in that tone meant only one thing. The test had failed. Back in the branch, Celeste continued speaking. "They've denied the transaction. The manager is Rachel Whitman. The staff involved are Kyle Thompson, Richard Kane, and Megan Reed. I've recorded the interaction. Security cameras should confirm it." She paused and then added, her voice dipping slightly, "I need you here. Now." Her words were deliberate, measured. Each syllable was a match dropped into gasoline. Richard, who had taken a step back to laugh about the situation with Kyle, suddenly stopped mid-smirk. "Did she just say Veronica?" Kyle furrowed his brow. "Veronica? Who?" Celeste didn't answer them. She didn't need to, because the weight of recognition had already started to settle over them. The name wasn't just familiar, it was feared. Veronica Hayes was second only to the CEO, and no one had her direct number, unless they were important. Probably bluffing, Kyle muttered, his confidence flickering like a dying bulb. People name drop all the time. Rachel was less sure. She had turned slightly, eyes narrowing. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. The first cracks were forming. The marble clock mounted above the branch's central security camera ticked loudly. It was now 10:03 a.m. 17 minutes had passed since Celeste entered the branch. 17 minutes of degradation. 17 minutes of public humiliation. 17 minutes of proof. Because unbeknownst to the staff, the security room at Summit's headquarters had already pulled the footage. Multiple screens showed Celeste Morgan being delayed, questioned, and treated with suspicion, all in real time. Side-by-side clips now played, comparing her interaction with those of white customers earlier that morning. It was no longer hearsay. It was a systemic pattern, and it was caught on camera. In the branch, Rachel was growing impatient. She took a step toward Celeste. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises if you're refusing to end the transaction." Celeste turned to her. "I'm not refusing anything," she said, her voice like velvet over steel. "I'm complying with all requirements. I'm requesting my funds. You're the one refusing." Rachel's lips thinned. "This is a private business. We reserve the right to deny service if we believe something is suspicious." Celeste tilted her head. "And what exactly do you find suspicious?" Rachel didn't answer, not with words, but with silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any slur. It said, "You don't look like someone who should have that kind of money." And Celeste heard it all, but she didn't respond in anger. Instead, she turned to the young security guard who had been lingering awkwardly by the wall, clearly unsure of what to do. His name tag read Terry. He couldn't have been more than 25. She looked him directly in the eyes. "Sir," she said gently, "I've done nothing wrong. I've provided all ID and documents. I've asked to access funds I legally own. I would ask that you do not assist in violating my rights because someone in a suit tells you to." Terry blinked, caught completely off guard. The words hit differently. They weren't an argument. They were a request for integrity. He didn't respond, but his hands dropped from his belt. He didn't reach for his radio. Rachel noticed. "Terry," she snapped, "please escort this woman out, now." The word "this woman" rang louder than it should have. Celeste, still holding her phone, said softly, "Terry, my name is Celeste Morgan, and I'd suggest you wait just a few more moments before you decide which side of this you want to stand on." Then the lobby door opened, but not with the quiet whoosh of a regular customer. This time it slammed. Veronica Hayes walked in. Her heels struck the marble like a metronome of authority. Her navy blazer flared slightly behind her with each step. Her eyes scanned the room and locked onto Rachel, and then onto Celeste. And in that instant, everyone in the room finally understood. Something had gone very, very wrong, and it wasn't Celeste's withdrawal request. The lobby fell into a hush, the kind of hush that swallows words and sharpens breathing. Veronica Hayes stood just past the threshold, framed by the open glass doors of Summit First Financial's flagship branch. Her presence didn't announce itself with noise. It didn't need to. The room recognized authority in the way a storm recognizes thunder. She wore a slate gray blazer over a crisp white blouse, her black heels clicking a steady beat on the marble floor as she walked with purpose through the stunned crowd of employees and customers. Her eyes, sharp, unflinching, locked onto Rachel Whitman, who for the first time since the morning began, took a step back. "Stop this," Veronica said, her voice like cold steel wrapped in velvet. "Now!" It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a warning. It was a command. Rachel blinked. Once. Twice. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Her practiced composure, the one she wielded like a shield during branch meetings and performance reviews, had cracked. Her lips parted, her fingers twitched against her sides. "Miss Porter," she began. "Don't," Veronica cut her off. "Don't pretend you don't know who this is." She turned toward Celeste, still standing tall, still calm, still composed, then back to the staff. "This is Celeste Morgan, Chief Executive Officer of Summit First Financial. Your boss, the head of this entire institution." You could feel it, the air collapsing out of the room. Megan Reed gasped audibly, her eyes wide and watering. Richard's smirk fell from his face like a cracked mask. Kyle took a half step backward and instinctively reached for the counter, as if needing support to remain standing. But it was Rachel's expression that changed most. Disbelief, then recognition, then horror. No, she whispered half to herself. But it was. It was. The woman they had mocked, doubted, and humiliated was the CEO, and she had seen and recorded every word, every gesture, every contemptuous glance. Veronica raised her hand, holding up a sleek black tablet. Its screen displayed a grid of security footage, all time-stamped and marked with red flags. One clip showed Megan's initial hesitation. Another captured Richard's mocking tone. Still another displayed Kyle looming behind the counter. And finally, Rachel, with her smug dismissal and thinly veiled racism. "We've been watching," Veronica said coldly. "The head office has been reviewing live security feeds since 9:40. We've seen it all." She tapped the screen and turned it to Rachel. "Including you telling the CEO of this bank that she should take her business to a check cashing center." Rachel paled. Her mouth opened again, to defend herself, to explain, to pivot. But no sound came out. A pin could have dropped, and the marble would have echoed. Veronica turned back to Celeste and gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am," she said, her tone softening, "on behalf of this institution, I'm sorry for what you've endured." Celeste inclined her head slightly but didn't speak. Not yet. She wasn't finished observing. Now the room had to sit with what it had done. Behind the tellers, the remaining staff stood frozen. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with horrified fascination, their roles in the scene flashing before their eyes. A few began to step away from the counter subtly, realizing their presence in the background of this disaster might soon be examined in high-definition clarity. Rachel found her voice at last. This was a misunderstanding," she said, her voice tight. "We have protocols for large cash withdrawals. I was only—" "Don't lie," Veronica said sharply. Her tone dropped all pretense. "You've approved 3 large cash transactions for white clients this morning alone. All of them are above $90,000. All processed in under 7 minutes. None were asked about their purpose. None were turned away. None were told they looked suspicious. But this woman, our CEO, was treated like a criminal." Kyle stepped forward, eyes wide, voice cracking. "We didn't know who she was." "That's the point," Veronica snapped. "You didn't need to. Every customer deserves basic dignity, regardless of their name, their appearance, or your assumption of their worth." Veronica turned back to Celeste, who stepped forward now, the silence parting for her like water around stone. She stood tall, unshaken. "I didn't come here for this," Celeste said quietly, her voice clear, direct, and utterly controlled. "I came here for the truth, to understand what our customers experience when we aren't watching." She paused. "And now I do." She scanned the room slowly, eyes resting on each staff member, one by one. "You've confirmed what our numbers hinted at, that behind our mission statements and public campaigns, there are people who believe dignity is optional, that equity can be bent, that appearance is a substitute for merit." The room hung on her every word. Rachel couldn't meet her gaze. "I've seen enough," Celeste said finally. Veronica nodded. "Effective immediately," she declared, turning back to the staff. "Rachel Whitman, Richard Kane, and Kyle Thompson. You are relieved of duty." Gasps echoed through the space. Richard choked on a breath. "Wait, you can't—" "I can," Celeste interrupted, "and I just did." "Terry," Veronica called to the young security guard, "escort them to collect their belongings. Now." Terry, who had silently watched the humiliation unfold earlier with visible discomfort, now moved with quiet resolve. "Yes, ma'am." He approached the counter without hesitation. Rachel's face contorted, disbelief turning to rage, then panic. "You're making a mistake," she spat. "I've worked here for 15 years. Celeste's eyes narrowed. "And today, you proved you never understood what this bank stands for. Not once in those 15 years. As Rachel, Richard, and Kyle were led away, not with applause, not with spectacle, but with the heavy silence of accountability, the remaining customers and staff were left stunned. No one cheered, no one clapped, because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't need celebration, it demands reflection. And as Celeste turned back to face the quiet crowd still watching her in disbelief, she knew this moment wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of change. The heavy glass doors slowly shut behind Rachel, Richard, and Kyle, their retreat echoing like the end of an era. Not just for the branch, but for a culture that had hidden behind polished desks and rehearsed smiles for far too long. The lobby of Summit First Financial's flagship branch remained suspended in stillness. Not the silence of confusion anymore, the silence of realization. Celeste Morgan stood in the center of it, calm but unyielding, a lighthouse in the fog of shame that had just swept through her institution. She glanced at the remaining staff, faces pale, eyes averted, hearts pounding, and then turned to face the young woman still behind the teller window. Megan Reed, now visibly trembling, tried to speak, but no words would come. And then from the corner, hesitant but audible, a voice broke through. I'm so sorry. Everyone turned. It was Lana Kim, the junior teller, who hadn't spoken until now. Her voice cracked as she stepped from behind her station. I should have said something earlier. I knew what they were doing was wrong. I didn't know how to stop it. Her eyes glistened with tears she tried to hold back. I wanted to help. I just froze. Celeste looked at her, not with judgment, not with sympathy, but with clarity. Freezing isn't a crime, Celeste said gently, but staying frozen is. Lana nodded, tears now spilling freely. Please, give me a chance to make it right. The whole lobby heard her plea, and Celeste, instead of delivering punishment, took a breath and turned it into a lesson. She stepped forward, raising her voice just enough for everyone to hear. This isn't just about 3 people being fired, Celeste said. It's about a system that lets them thrive. Heads slowly lifted. We've been measuring performance with the wrong tools, she continued. Transactions, conversion rates, account growth, but we haven't been measuring what matters. Fairness, respect, humanity. She paused to let that sink in. From this moment forward, every branch in this bank will be evaluated not just by profit, but by equity metrics, disaggregated satisfaction scores, disparity reports in service time, real accountability. Veronica, standing nearby, nodded and began typing on her tablet, already setting the protocols in motion. Celeste turned to the staff again. No more pretending that this doesn't happen. No more brushing it aside with customer misunderstandings or tough days. This bank serves every community, not just the ones you relate to. A ripple moved through the room. Some nodded slowly. Others looked down, finally understanding how complicit silence could be. And yes, Celeste continued, there will be consequences. But there will also be second chances. She looked at Lana Kim. You didn't protect me, she said softly. But you just chose courage. That matters. Lana's shoulders shook, but she stood a little taller. You'll be placed under review, Celeste said, but not for punishment, for training, for growth. We don't throw people away for being afraid. We give them tools to be brave next time. It wasn't just mercy, it was leadership. Celeste's eyes moved across the lobby again. She saw the customers were still standing, still silent, witnessing something they hadn't expected when they came in that morning. A reckoning, but also a resurrection. She turned to Veronica. Send out the statement, she said. Full transparency. We admit the failure, and we show exactly what we're doing to fix it. Veronica nodded. Already drafted. I'll coordinate the press release. Want to review the language before it goes live? Celeste shook her head. I want it raw, unpolished, not sanitized for PR. Let them know we're serious. Then she added with quiet conviction, we're not covering this up. We're uncovering it and owning it. From the back hallway, Terry, the young security guard, reappeared, his face still pale but his posture straighter than before. Celeste walked toward him. I noticed you didn't intervene, she said. He looked down. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained for that. You will be, she said. Starting now, all security personnel will be trained in anti-bias protocol and customer rights. You deserve tools, not just a badge. He looked up, surprised. Thank you. No, Celeste said. Thank you for listening when it mattered. As she moved back toward the teller stations, something extraordinary began to happen. One by one, customers started clapping. Not loud, not performative, just real, measured, earnest. A middle-aged black woman near the waiting area stood with mist in her eyes. A Hispanic father with a toddler on his hip nodded solemnly. Even an older white man, who had earlier watched the incident unfold without comment, joined in, slowly tapping his hands together in growing rhythm. The lobby, which had been so heavy just moments before, was now filled with something rare in corporate spaces. Hope. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply bowed her head once. Not for applause, but for a purpose. She stepped aside and turned to Veronica. I want the new signage up by tomorrow. Veronica blinked. You mean the internal one for staff code of conduct? No, Celeste said. The one for customers. She pulled a folded sheet from her bag. Handwritten, it read, all customers deserve respect, dignity, and fair service. If your experience does not reflect these values, please call this number. Beneath it, her direct office line. Celeste Morgan, CEO. Veronica's eyes widened. You're putting your number? Yes, Celeste said. Let them call me. Let them hold us accountable. Let them know someone at the top is watching and listening. It was no longer just about firing 3 employees. It was about rewriting the rules of how a bank could operate, with conscience, transparency, and unshakable integrity. And that change had already begun. 3 days later, the Grand Hall of the Eastwood Civic Center stood at capacity. Every seat is filled. Cameras from every major news outlet framed the long stage where microphones were arranged, pristine water glasses aligned, and nameplates neatly positioned. The flag of the United States hung behind the podium, flanked by the Summit First financial emblem, now shining under more scrutiny than ever before. But no one was watching the banners. They were waiting for Celeste Morgan. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the double doors opened. She walked in without an entourage, without fanfare, dressed in a dark gray pantsuit that seemed deliberately unadorned, not to hide power, but to remind the world that leadership didn't have to shout. It could simply walk into the room and change everything. She stepped to the podium and looked directly into the sea of lenses and eyes. I want to begin today, she said, voice steady, by saying something very few corporate leaders dare to say. She paused. We failed. No introduction, no spin, no damage control. Just the truth. Raw. Necessary. In our flagship branch, she continued, we failed to uphold the very values we promise our customers: dignity, fairness, and equity. The room was so quiet, you could hear the buzz of camera lenses focusing. A customer who happened to be male was denied service, humiliated, and profiled based solely on race and appearance. But this isn't just about a single moment or a single branch. It's about a culture that too often ignores the quiet injustices that hide in plain sight. She let that settle, and then she began to build. We cannot fix what we refuse to see, Celeste said, her eyes scanning the crowd. So today we are not just acknowledging what happened. We are taking unprecedented action to ensure it does not happen again to anyone. She outlined Summit's Equitable Banking Initiative, a $50 million investment in anti-discrimination training across all 700 branches nationwide, an anonymous, real-time reporting system for customers to flag mistreatment tied directly to her office, a new client equity advisory board composed of past victims of banking discrimination, adjusted performance metrics for all employees, now weighted to prioritize fairness over sales. We're not rebranding, she said. We're realigning, the values this bank was supposed to represent all along. At that moment, Celeste gestured to the front row. There sat Michael Tran, whose small business loan had been denied 3 times despite perfect credit. Beside him was Elena Rodriguez, who'd been told to try a different bank because she might not qualify before anyone read her application. Next to her, James Holloway, a retired postal worker who waited 47 minutes for service, while others were helped ahead of him. These are not isolated cases, Celeste said. They are the stories of millions, and their stories now shape our future. The crowd began to murmur, not in dissent, but in a kind of collective breath-holding. This wasn't just another executive passing blame down the line. This was an invitation to rebuild trust in public. And then came the moment no one expected. Celeste tapped her tablet and brought up a simple, powerful slide. If you've ever been dismissed, degraded, or doubted, not because of your finances, but because of your face, we want to hear from you. Below it, her personal summit email and direct office line. This won't be filtered by assistants or algorithms, she said. This comes straight to my desk, straight to my eyes. If we're going to serve everyone, we have to listen to everyone. A collective shift rippled through the room. No CEO had ever done this. Not in banking, not like this. She wasn't here to protect her brand. She was here to protect people. And that's when she said it. If you believe every human being deserves dignity, not for who they know, not for what they wear, but simply for who they are, I invite you to stand with us. She paused, then added gently, like this video, share it, comment below with one word, respect. Because that's what we're building now. Brick by brick, policy by policy, person by person. This is the first CTA point, naturally embedded and emotionally charged. At the back of the room, a reporter stood up. Ms. Morgan, she asked, why take this risk? Why open yourself and the bank to more criticism? Celeste smiled, not broadly, but the kind of smile that came from deep conviction. Because the greater risk, she said, is doing nothing. A second later, a standing ovation broke out. Not because a scandal had been resolved, but because a leader had chosen transparency over protection, and the world was watching. Back at Summit headquarters, Veronica Hayes was already fielding calls from banks, nonprofits, and regulators alike. They all had the same question. Can we learn from what you did? To which she answered, yes, but it only works if you're willing to look in the mirror and not flinch. And in branches across the country, something began to change. Tellers double-checked their tone. Managers reviewed footage not just for efficiency, but for empathy. Customers walked in, not afraid, but aware that someone, somewhere at the top, was watching. Not with suspicion, but with accountability, because Celeste Morgan had shown them how. 3 days after the press conference, the applause had faded. The headlines had shifted from admiration to analysis, and then, as they always do, to attack. CEO weaponizes, race for PR win. Banking goes woke, shareholders react. Is dignity a distraction from profit? The words flashed across morning news shows and opinion columns like wildfire. Talk show hosts debated it. Conservative pundits dismissed it. Financial blogs tore into it. They called it overreach, optics, a stunt in sensitivity theater. But the most cutting critique didn't come from strangers on TV. It came from within. Inside the 21st floor of Summit First Financial's headquarters, a boardroom meeting was underway, and it wasn't going well. I just think we're opening ourselves to unnecessary scrutiny, said Dennis Warg, a longtime board member with decades in mergers and acquisitions. It's one thing to acknowledge a problem. It's another to advertise it. Celeste sat at the head of the long table, her face unreadable. You mean it's one thing to whisper about it, she replied. But when we say it aloud, now it's inconvenient? Dennis raised his hands. All I'm saying is we've got shareholders spooked. The stock dipped 3% yesterday. And it'll dip 10% more, Celeste said coolly, if we're sued for civil rights violations. That shut him up momentarily. But he wasn't alone. Others around the table exchanged glances. Their silence didn't mean agreement. It meant cowardice. Only Veronica Hayes spoke up. She's not just managing risk, Veronica said. She's redefining responsibility. And redefining this bank, Celeste added, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. That night, alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, Celeste stood by the window, the lights of downtown glowing like stars trapped in glass. She didn't need a mirror to see what was behind her eyes. Exhaustion, conviction, doubt, resolve, all dancing in the same breath. She had known the backlash would come, knew there would be pushback, but she hadn't expected the worst resistance to come from the very table she now led. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated and answered. Celeste Morgan speaking. Ms. Morgan, a familiar voice responded. You don't know me, but I know what you just did. Celeste tensed slightly. Go on. My name is Malcolm Graves, the voice continued. I run one of the largest black-owned private equity firms in the country. You don't need my praise, but I want to offer something else. What's that? Support, strategic, vocal, financial. Celeste didn't reply immediately. Malcolm added, there's power in what you did, and danger. And sometimes you need people beside you who don't ask you to slow down, but help you clear the road. The next morning, Celeste walked into work to find a package waiting for her on her desk. Inside, a handwritten note. Courage costs, but silence bankrupts. MG, and beneath it, a signed commitment. $20 million from Malcolm's firm towards Summit's Equitable Banking Fund. No conditions, no strings. Just believe. By noon, the narrative began to shift. News of the donation broke online. Malcolm Graves appeared on national TV with an unshakable calm and a very direct quote. What Celeste Morgan is doing isn't political, it's patriotic. When fairness becomes controversial, the problem isn't leadership. It's the culture that fears it. It went viral in under 2 hours. That afternoon, several large community banks reached out to partner with Summit on equity initiatives. A coalition of minority business associations released a joint letter of support, and a group of law students from Howard University delivered handwritten thank you letters to Celeste's office. Dozens of them, each one beginning with, I didn't know people like me could run things like this, until now. In the weekly executive check-in, Celeste stood before her top leadership team, some still cautious, others newly inspired. I didn't come here to run this bank the way it's always been run, she told them. I came to build the bank that should have always existed. The room quieted, and then Veronica leaned in. What's next? Celeste smiled. For the first time that week, a real smile. Next, she said, we make this more than policy. We make it personal. The storm had passed, but Celeste Morgan knew the real work begins after the headlines fade. The termination of Rachel Whitman, Richard Kane, and Kyle Thompson had sent a shockwave through Summit First Financial, a message loud enough to rattle every regional branch, every office corridor, every corner where whisper networks used to live safely in the shadows. But what mattered most now wasn't fear, it was a transformation. 3 weeks after the press conference, Celeste returned to the same branch where it all began. Not undercover, not as a customer, but as the leader they could no longer ignore. The staff had changed, the energy had changed, but the air, still thick with something unspoken. Not resistance anymore, but uncertainty. Because culture doesn't vanish with a firing, it lingers, in glances, in silence. Subtly, people wait to see if this too will pass. Celeste stood in front of the remaining staff that morning, all gathered in the lobby. Tellers, back-office processors, new faces, old ones. Her gaze swept across the group, pausing, not in judgment, but in discernment. Then she said, we are not starting from scratch today. We are starting from the truth. She turned to Lana Kim, the junior teller who had broken the silence weeks earlier. Lana, she said, you're not the most experienced person here. You're not the highest ranked. But you did something most didn't. You admitted what you saw, and you asked to do better. Lana stood frozen. Celeste stepped closer. You're not perfect, but you're awake, and that's where leadership begins. She reached into a folder and held up a single sheet. This is your promotion, she said. Gas rippled through the crowd. Effective today, you are the interim branch manager of Summit's downtown location. Lana's eyes widened. But I was part of what happened. You were present, Celeste corrected, but you weren't silent, and that's the difference. Behind her, Veronica Hayes nodded slightly, an unspoken approval, a quiet endorsement of something new. For the first time, Lana spoke with confidence. Then I promise I won't waste this. Celeste smiled. Good, because this isn't about you anymore. It's about everyone who walks through those doors. Later that afternoon, in a smaller closed-door session, Celeste sat with 5 remaining employees who had witnessed the entire scandal and said nothing. Not because they agreed, not because they were cruel, but because they were afraid. Celeste didn't yell. She didn't shame. She listened and then said, "There's no handbook for speaking up against power when power looks you in the face. But here's the truth. If you can't risk discomfort for a stranger's dignity, you're not ready to represent this bank." The room was still. Then one of them, Sam, a longtime operations clerk, looked up. "I didn't think my voice would matter," he said quietly. Celeste responded, "It matters most when it's shaking." And then she gave each of them 2 choices. Undergo a 6-week intensive accountability and equity training, personally designed by Summit's new advisory board, or transfer out, not as punishment, but to make space for someone willing to grow. 4 of them chose the training. 1 resigned. Celeste accepted it without comment, because accountability, too, is a choice. Back at headquarters, Veronica prepared the first quarterly culture audit, a comprehensive review of every Summit branch's service patterns, disaggregated by race, gender, language, and zip code. It was radical, transparent, and not optional. Branch leaders would be measured on how equally they served, not just how quickly or profitably. And yes, bonuses would reflect it. But Summit's transformation wasn't just internal. By the end of that month, 3 regional branches had adopted a silent observer rotation, employees role-playing as customers of different demographics to report bias. 24 HR managers were recertified in equity-first hiring practices. A new employee hotline was launched, allowing staff to report subtle discrimination without retaliation. And in the center of every branch, a new poster appeared. Not glossy, not abstract, just words. "Every customer is a person. Every person deserves dignity. If that isn't your belief, this isn't your bank." The quote was attributed, in bold, Celeste Morgan, CEO. Across the country, customers began noticing the change. Black clients were no longer met with suspicion when depositing 5-figure checks. Latina entrepreneurs were no longer talked down to when asking about business credit. Elderly Asian customers were greeted with patience, not impatience. It didn't solve everything, but it proved something. This bank was listening now, and amidst all that progress, a small moment happened, one that wouldn't make headlines. At the original downtown branch, a young white man, clearly unfamiliar with the environment, approached Lana Kim's new manager's desk. He had a crumpled letter in his hand. "My grandma passed," he said. "She left me a trust. I've never dealt with any of this." Lana stood. She walked him to a chair, and for the next 40 minutes, she guided him, kindly, carefully, without rushing once. When it was over, he turned and said, "I didn't expect to be treated like I mattered." Lana smiled. "You do," she said. Summit First Financial's transformation was no longer just internal. It had become national news, but with visibility came vulnerability. And not all enemies wore name tags. Inside the private conference room on the 24th floor, 3 of the bank's largest shareholders sat together. Behind closed doors, behind polished tables, behind generations of silent control. Their names weren't known to the public, but their influence had shaped Summit's boardroom for decades. Marshall Keene, investment tycoon. Trent Hollowell, former CEO, turned majority shareholder. Cynthia Harrow, co-founder of one of the bank's oldest private equity partners. All of them were disturbed, not by scandal, but by Celeste Morgan's growing power. "She's turning this place into a non-profit," Marshall scoffed. "Since when do banks exist to be fair?" "Since she made them," Cynthia said dryly. "She's too visible," Trent added. "Too clean. Too careful. She's bulletproof right now." Marshall leaned forward. "Then we take the bullet out of the press and load it into policy." The next morning, Celeste received the agenda for the upcoming emergency board session. Item 4 shocked even her. Proposal: Executive Performance Review and Confidence Vote. CEO Celeste Morgan. She stared at the words, not out of fear, but recognition. This was it, the real test. The applause was over. The culture was shifting, and now the system was trying to reassert itself. Veronica Hayes slammed her palm on the table when she heard the news. They're trying to oust you. They think if they call it a vote of confidence, they can make it sound like it's about performance, not power. Celeste remained calm. No, let them call the vote. Veronica narrowed her eyes. You're not fighting this? I already did. Celeste reached for a folder in her drawer. Simple, thick, sealed. I've been preparing this file for months, long before the branch incident. I knew this day might come. What is it? Veronica asked. Celeste opened the folder and handed her a packet of documents. Veronica skimmed the first page, then stopped. Her jaw dropped. You've been conducting a parallel audit of the board? Not just the board, Celeste replied. Their portfolios, their voting patterns, their back-channel communications, their conflicts of interest, everything. Veronica's voice dropped. This is nuclear. No, Celeste said softly. This is insurance. When the emergency board meeting began, the room was tense. The usual small talk was absent. Trent Hollowell, with his rehearsed confidence, sat upright, hands folded in front of him. Marshall Keene wore a smug smile. Cynthia Harrow? Stone silent. Celeste entered last, dressed in charcoal gray, folder in hand. She greeted no one. She took her seat and waited. Jonathan Prescott, chairman of the board, cleared his throat. As per procedural protocol, we have entered into a closed session to discuss agenda item 4. He paused. Celeste raised her hand. Before we vote, she said, I'd like to enter something into the record. Prescott hesitated. You may proceed. Celeste stood. She handed out copies of the file, one for every board member. No one spoke. As pages turned, you could hear paper crinkle like leaves in the wind. Each document contained detailed breakdowns of disproportionate loan approvals for businesses linked to Marshall's investment network, emails in which Trent had lobbied to suppress equity metrics, and Cynthia's firm having rejected applicants at a 72% higher rate for Black-owned startups, all while quietly profiting from DEI branding partnerships. The room chilled. This isn't a threat, Celeste said. It's transparency. I know how Summit works. Not just on the surface, but in the roots. Then she added quietly but firmly, You don't want me gone because I failed. You want me gone because I succeeded. Because I've proven that we can build a bank that serves everyone and still outperform the competition. Jonathan Prescott cleared his throat again, this time with real weight. I believe we've seen enough. A motion was made. The vote commenced. One by one, hands went up. Prescott, yes. Veronica Hayes, yes. Catherine Reynolds, yes. Dennis Whitehill, yes. Cynthia Harrow, yes. Trent and Marshall exchanged glances. Defeated. 7 votes in favor. 1 abstained. Confidence confirmed. Celeste remained CEO. As the boardroom emptied, Cynthia Harrow lingered behind. She approached Celeste. For the first time in 2 decades, she looked unsure of herself. I underestimated you, she said. No, Celeste replied. You didn't. You just didn't believe someone like me would follow through. Cynthia gave a faint smile. I believe it now. That evening, Celeste returned to her office and pulled the blinds wide open. She didn't toast. She didn't exhale. She opened a new folder, titled Phase 3, Internal Uplift, From Reform to Rebirth, because this wasn't the climax. It was clearance. The old guard had fired their last shot and failed. Now rebuilding could begin without obstruction. 6 months had passed since the day Celeste Morgan walked into her bank, disguised as a stranger. 6 months after a withdrawal request had exposed a culture built on quiet exclusion. 6 months since she said, "We failed." But today, standing behind the podium of the newly reopened Summit Equity headquarters, she wasn't talking about failure. She was talking about rebirth. The media called it the Celeste effect. Since implementing the new culture audit systems, Summit's customer satisfaction has risen 31%, particularly in underrepresented communities. New account openings among minority-owned businesses doubled. Internal employee engagement scores, the highest in a decade. But numbers weren't what brought the nation to its feet. It was what they represented. that a bank, a financial institution once considered cold, faceless, could become a space of dignity, accountability, and hope. Behind Celeste, a new wall display had just been unveiled in the headquarters lobby. Not marble, not gold-plated, just wood and glass, framing 100 handwritten stories from real customers who had once been turned away, ignored, or profiled. Each letter began the same way. "Dear Celeste, thank you for making space for me." Celeste took a breath, then spoke to the room of journalists, employees, and partners gathered before her. "We didn't change Summit to look better," she began. "We changed Summit to be better." She looked directly into the camera. "And we're not done." Her new initiative was bold, a rotational equity leadership program to train next-gen bank managers from underserved communities, a $100 million microloan pool for Black, Latino, Indigenous, and refugee entrepreneurs, backed directly by Summit profits. Mandatory historical bias training not just for new hires, but for all existing executives, including board members, and an internal reverse mentorship program where junior employees from marginalized groups mentored senior executives on blind spots and lived experience. It was radical, it was unprecedented, and it was working. But the most powerful moment of the event came not from Celeste's words, but from who joined her on stage. Lana Kim, once a nervous teller, is now the permanent branch manager of Summit Downtown, flanked by a new team she helped select. Sam, the former operations clerk who once stayed silent, is now heading Summit's internal ethics and culture desk. Terry, the young security guard who hesitated at a crucial moment, is now leading Summit's new customer rights training for all security staff across 22 states. Their stories were no longer buried in shame. They had become pillars of the new structure. When the speeches ended, Celeste walked the floor, shaking hands not just with executives, but with interns, clerks, and custodians. One of them, an elderly Jamaican woman with Summit's blue name tag pinned proudly to her uniform, stopped her and said, "My grandson just opened his first savings account here. I told him, 'This bank, it's different.'" Celeste smiled. "Tell him he belongs here." That night, the New York Times would call her the Rosa Parks of Wall Street. But Celeste didn't need titles. She had already earned something greater: legacy. A living legacy, not carved in stone, but in every act of justice the system used to overlook. And she knew this wasn't just about Summit. It was a signal to every leader afraid to challenge tradition, a beacon to every institution terrified of losing comfort to gain conscience. A quiet reminder that power used for others is the most dangerous kind of power, because it never dies. It multiplies. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Celeste stood alone in her office, looking down at the city. In her hands, a letter, one of the 100, this one from a teenager in Detroit. "You don't know me, but my mom cried when they gave her a fair loan for the first time in her life. She said someone must have changed the rules. I just wanted to say, thank you for being that someone." Celeste folded the letter slowly and whispered to herself, "We all deserve someone. And when no one shows up, you become someone." Final message of the story. In the journey of Celeste Morgan, we witnessed more than a scandal. We witnessed a quiet revolution. A woman who didn't raise her voice, but raised a mirror to a broken system. A leader who didn't chase power, but used it to make others feel seen. Celeste didn't change the world by demanding attention. She changed it by demanding accountability. And in doing so, she reminded us, dignity is not a luxury, it's a human right. Respect should never be earned through appearance, granted through presence. Real-world lesson. Power doesn't always come with titles. Sometimes it walks in wearing sneakers in silence and still commands a room. If a system refuses to see you, don't shrink. Stand taller, speak, stay steady. And if you've ever been ignored, profiled, or dismissed, don't just survive the moment. Use it, build from it, lead from it. Because one person's quiet refusal to back down can echo across an entire institution. This is your reminder. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be true. If this message spoke to you, pass it forward. You never know who's watching and waiting for permission to rise.